This episode of the Bible Beer Consortium is sponsored by Solid State artist August Burns Webb.
And let's begin. Tonight's speaker, John Lepp, for most of his life was a Jewish atheist. He accepted Jesus into his life over 5 years ago. It appears that he was elected by God to reconcile the Jewish people with the acceptance of their Messiah, dissolve the appearance of conflict between the practice of science and the belief in God, and dispel the foolishness of the new atheists claiming reason to be their executive mantle. John Lepp was a protege of noted atheist, logical positivist philosopher Sir Alfred Jules Ayer. John Lepp has his Master's of Science from the University of Edinburgh. He proudly delivered the seminal work, Nomological Statements and Game Theoretical Semantics. Actually, Mike and I were just reading that while we were playing Pokemon Go. Before the Royal British Society for the Philosophy of Science. His book, which he'll have copies back there for sale, Fact versus Value, The Imaginary War Between Science and God, was a bestseller on Amazon, topping Bill Nye's book. I hate Bill Nye. I want to wear a bow tie so bad. You never didn't see it, I know. That's why. I don't hate Bill Nye. John Lepp is happily married to his wife, Kimberly Rodriguez Lepp. They live in Boca Raton, Florida. Tomorrow is his birthday. Speaking to is God, the source of all that is good. Please welcome John Lepp.
Well, I have to tell you, I was blessed to hear Aaron serenading me like Frank Sinatra. That is truly special. I will cherish that forever. Howdy. Thank you all for allowing me the opportunity to speak to you. I'm not too well known around these parts, unlike Aaron, so I do treasure this opportunity. Thank you, Ezra and the BBC. I'm going to deliver a paper tentatively titled, The Beer Drinker's Proof of God. The reason why I am tentative about that title is that my paper contains some very serious stuff. I don't want to suggest that it's all a joke. Before we get fully started, I'd like to thank 3 atheists in particular. First, let me start off by thanking Aron Ra, and not only for serenading me. I had the pleasure of viewing a few of his videos. He's a prolific speaker. I applaud the rigor by which he approaches subjects of discussion. The second person I wish to thank is J.T. Eberhard. I've never done a live formal debate before tonight. This is my first live debate. My only formal debating experience was on JT's blog. I had a formal debate with JT on his blog about whether the findings of science refute Christianity. JT was kind enough to provide me instruction on the format of the debate and also provide me insight on how to formulate debate topics. So I wish to thank JT for that opportunity. I hope that opportunity serves as a stepping stone for tonight's debate. Well, okay. The third notable atheist thinker I wish to thank was my friend and mentor, Sir Alfred Jules Ayer. I'm going to be talking about him in a little bit tonight because his work actually plays a role in tonight's discussion. Let me just start by mentioning Freddie's debates with Frederick Copleston on the other BBC, the British one, serves as a standard by which I hope to someday emulate. The debate question tonight is God the source of all that is good? There are effectively 3 possible answers that can be given. 1, no, God is not the source of all that is good, for we ourselves establish that which is good. 2, no, God is not the source of all that is good, for goodness is a property found in the natural world. 3, yes, God is the source of all that is good, for goodness is a value established supernaturally. There is, of course, the logical possibility of answering 4. No, sometimes God establishes that which is good, and sometimes good is established by another source. I find that answer to be ill-formed. Answering that God... Oh, who's crying for me? All right. Answering that God sometimes establishes that which is good, and sometimes good is established by some other means, assumes that you can actually make sense of what it means for goodness to be established by some other means. I am going to argue that you cannot really make sense out of the idea that goodness can be established subjectively, nor can you really make sense out of the idea that goodness is a natural property. If it can be shown that good is neither a subjective opinion nor a natural property, then it would be necessarily false that God sometimes establishes that which is good, and sometimes good is established by either being subjective opinion or by being a natural property. That would be due to the law of conjunction. So, let's examine the 3 possibilities. The first possibility, God is not the source of all that is good, for it is we ourselves that establish that which is good. This is a very atheist-friendly position to argue. If goodness is subjective, then you can have goodness without God. My mentor was a strong proponent of this idea. It's called Emotivism. Here is what it has going for it. It preserves and recognizes the fact-value distinction. A value, say, for instance, good, is different than a fact. Good does more than just refer to a state of affairs. It evinces a supportive attitude towards something and generally provides an endorsement towards action. Facts simply report about what has occurred in the world. What you can infer from facts about action very much depends on what values are assigned to the facts. Values provide guidance on how you should act. So, if you accept the fact-value distinction, but reject God's existence, you would be inclined to argue that good is subjective and based on your emotions. That's called emotivism. Here's the problem with emotivism. You can't consistently use it to make sense of examples in the real world. Let me give you an instance. The example I'm going to give you is going to be one where I am pretty sure that Aaron and I agree. In fact, I am pretty sure that everyone here will agree. I am pretty sure that everyone here finds female genital mutilation an absolutely disgusting, wretched practice. The World Health Organization reports that, quote, more than 200 million girls and women alive today have been cut in 30 countries in Africa, the Middle East, and Asia, where female genital mutilation is primarily concentrated, end quote. And that is predominantly performed on girls under the age of 15. So this is happening right now. What would an emotivist say to a father that thinks female genital mutilation is a good practice? Remember, this is happening now, and we are discussing what makes good actually good. The most an emotivist could say is, I feel you should stop. Perhaps an emotivist could cite the poor health effects of such practices to a father, but then the emotivist would still be speaking in terms which are value-laden. Good, bad, poor, well, worthiness would also be considered to be subjective by those who espouse emotivism. Here's the thing. In order for that father to be right or wrong about genital mutilation, the father's belief or our belief must be able to accord with what is really the case. As Socrates said, quote, A system of morality, which is based on relative emotional values, is a mere illusion, a thoroughly vulgar conception which has nothing sound in it and nothing true, end quote. That's in Plato's Phaedo. So, without there being an objective good, there is no objective basis to say whether or not female genital mutilation is a good practice. But we all know female genital mutilation is a disgusting, wretched practice. So we actually know that it is not a good practice. Okay. Emotivism was a popular doctrine amongst logical positivists. Logical positivism is no longer a popular philosophy. As I mentioned before, my mentor, a logical positivist, was a strong proponent of emotivism. He's no longer with us. So you might think that this philosophical doctrine has died out, but somehow Richard Dawkins has managed to give emotivism a second life. Now, Dawkins does not call his doctrine emotivism. He calls it a Darwinian account of altruistic moral behavior, but it essentially boils down to the same thing. So let's start off with a great quote from Richard Dawkins. Quote, "The universe we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is, at bottom, no design, no evil, and no good. Nothing but blind, pitiless indifference." What Dawkins has just spoken about in this quote is a world without goodness, but it is also a world readily accessible to our five senses. So the question is, where do we get goodness? Dawkins observes that in nature, there are symbiotic relationships formed between various animals and plants to achieve a mutual benefit. A simple example of such symbiosis would be the relationship found between bees needing nectar and flowers needing to pollinate. Likewise, mutually beneficial relationships can be established within the same species and the same kin. From that, Dawkins derives four motivations for moral altruistic behavior. 1, for genetic kinship, such as mother-child, love, and working towards the survival of the family, altruism would be beneficial. 2, like the relationship between bees and flowers, but within the same species, there is reciprocation. Basically, that boils down to, I'll scratch your back if you scratch mine. 3, reputation and social standing can be helped, which in turn brings further rewards. 4, it helps social advancement by advertising and supporting social standing. So Dawkins hypothesizes that humans lived in conditions which favored all four types of altruism. Were Dawkins' account to hold? Perhaps Dawkins could reason that the objective good is a useful fiction. But in actuality, the idea of the good arises from the development of the evolutionary history of mankind. The idea of good would then arise from the four motivations given without there being any objective good. The problem I see with Dawkins' account is that there's no such historical record provided, and it does not really resolve any difficulty from whence good derives. Okay, we're going to examine the first motivation listed by Dawkins. Let's go back to the subject of female genital mutilation for a moment. What possible history could lead people to believe such an act is a good idea? But furthermore, when did we get the idea that it is a wretched idea? The decision on whether or not female genital mutilation is a good idea does not seem like the type of practice which would be discovered incrementally. But that discovery occurring incrementally is what evolution entails. What light does Dawkins' four motivations shed at this instance? The first motivation for altruistic behavior given is that the behavior would be motivated by genetic kinship. That is for the well-being of the family. Clearly, in many instances, female genital mutilation is performed with the motivation of familial love and kinship. Yet we clearly find the practice absolutely abhorrent. Take-home lesson here. Having the same motivation does not lead to the same action being deemed good. Were we solely reliant on Dawkins' Darwinian account of altruistic moral behavior, we would be left with conflicting opinions on what behavior is good. Strangely enough, we were not led to this point by empirical record, for there is no such historical record provided, and which determines what actions are good. Dawkins can rely on neither nature nor God to settle what behavior is good, for he was already quoted denying that goodness is to be found in the world, and Dawkins has gone through great lengths to deny God's existence. So, were we to subscribe to the Darwinian account of altruistic, moral behavior, we could say nothing to those fathers that think female genital mutilation is a good practice, other than we think they should stop. We could not even consistently tell them why they should stop. Proponents of Dawkins's Darwinian account of altruistic moral behavior face the same exact difficulty as those faced by proponents of emotivism. It does not make a difference whether there is just one person who finds something is good or whether several million more agree. Without there being an objective basis for what is right and for what is wrong, we can neither correctly concur nor correctly condemn the worthiness of an action. There would be no fact of the matter by which to agree. Okay, time to go over the second possibility. God is not the source of all that is good, for goodness is a property found in the natural world. There are pretty much two ways you can treat good as a property. You can treat good as a simple property predicated of the natural world. That's the tack taken by Plato. The other way you could treat good is as an intrinsic physical property. That's the tack taken by Aristotle. Now, it's strange that this second possibility boils down to a debate that was had in Athens, 5th century BC, because not much has changed. The new revised versions of this debate are delivered by George Edward Moore and Sam Harris. Plato, the author, through Socrates, the philosophical character in Plato's dialogues, explained that good is the idea of the superlative for things in this world. The idea, the form of good, is how things gain their value. Plato's idea of the good is developed further in the 20th century by George Edward Moore, G.E. Moore. Moore expressed the idea of the good as an unanalyzable, simple, non-natural property of things in the natural world. So good cannot be defined, but it can be ostensibly shown and grasped. The three things which make Moore's analysis Platonic is that the good is objective, it is not a natural property, but it is a quality which can be predicated of things in the natural world. Here is what treating good as a simple property predicate of the natural world has going for it. 1, it works with there being a fact-value distinction. 2, it works with there being objectively true statements concerning what is good. Here is what treating good as a simple property predicate of the natural world has going against it. 1, it is too abstract. How do we know what examples are good? How are differences settled when there is disagreement about what actions or what things in this world are good? 2, it falls prey to Aristotle's objection. How does goodness apply to the natural world without being part of the natural world? Without there being a means to understand the interaction between goodness and the natural world, there is no reason to suppose that goodness exists in the natural world. Aristotle sought to solve Plato's problem by contending that goodness is intrinsic, is essential to the things and activities of this world. Achieving the good, following Aristotle, is achieving the purpose for which something exists or the reason for why such an act occurred. The result of doing good, as well as by having good circumstance and by having other good things in this world, is our well-being. Now, Sam Harris took Aristotle's tie between good actions and well-being and just ran with it. Harris defines good as that which supports our well-being. That sounds very similar to what Aristotle just said. Harris goes on to define value by the relation good, and then proposes a way that would supposedly make goodness open to scientific investigation. Harris starts off his chain of reasoning by defining good as that which supports our well-being. Next, Harris then goes on to stipulate that well-being must be identical to some brain state for a sentient being. Scientists can theoretically measure some brain state. Therefore, scientists can measure good. Notice, though, each step in Harris's chain of reasoning is problematic. Let's start off with the defining of good as that which supports our well-being. Here, we see Harris is using a value, good, to define another value, being well, and then overall defining the term value in general. Supports is also a qualitative measure. So at this point, Harris is just being circular, using a value to define a value and then defining value as a whole. Next step, Harris stipulates that well-being must be identical to a brain state. Here, we see Harris committing what G.E. Moore named the naturalistic fallacy. Moore objects to the reducing of something valuative, say good, to something naturally physical, say pleasure or well-being, both of which in turn can be translated into some brain state so long as you are sentient, according to Harris. By the way, both the terms pleasure and well-being could be used as translations for eudaimonia, which would have been the concept that Aristotle was looking at. Okay, so let's take a look at what's going on here. If good and some brain state were identical, then the brain state, let's call it brain state C, would be able to be substituted with good in any case. So, can good be substituted with brain state C in all cases? I think I can show you that good cannot be substituted with being brain state C in all cases. Let's go back to the case of female genital mutilation for a moment. Let us suppose that we have two fathers who love their daughters very much. Let us suppose that every time the fathers act out of love for their daughters, they produce brain state C in their daughters. One father gets his daughter a tricycle, and it produces brain state C in their daughter. The other father hands his daughter over to a practitioner to perform the surgical procedure of genital mutilation, and it also produces brain state C in the daughter. After all, that daughter believes she will live a healthier life and perhaps sees it as a rite of passage. Are we prepared to say that the father's act is good since it produced the right brain state in the daughter? I would think we would all say no. It does not matter whether it is the father or the daughter that receives brain state C. Female genital mutilation is wrong regardless. In which case, good cannot be identified with being some brain state since you cannot substitute it in every case. The same brain state does not necessarily produce that which is good. There is no reason, a priori, why people having similar brain states cannot perform different actions of different worth. Hence, Harris is simply wrong when he states that good must be identical with some brain state. The feeling of, the sensation of well-being could be correlated with some brain state, but then well-being would lose its tie to being good, since goodness is used to judge the worthiness of an action and not just a measurement of its emotional appeal to the actor or the acted upon. Finally, the last step in Harris's syllogism is that scientists can measure brain states. Maybe, maybe not. Harris is projecting into the future when scientists will be able to have the means to do so, and is assuming that each sensation reduces to its own individual brain state. I don't know if that's the case, and I don't know why it would have to be the case. From all the steps that Harris has drawn, you cannot infer that scientists will be able to measure goodness. Scientists measure actual fact and are not in the business of making measurements of goodness. There simply is a difference between measuring a physical property and measuring a physical property's measurement's worthiness. Now, Aristotle was unaware of the fact-value distinction. That distinction was pointed out much later by David Hume, whose analysis on causal relationships and the fact-value distinction pretty much spelt the end of Aristotle's teleological system. Sam Harris, however, came after David Hume. Harris knows this stuff, and he explicitly wants to reject the fact-value distinction, but hasn't given us sufficient reason to do so. So, this is where we're at. The source for whatever makes good good, must allow for goodness to be objective while respecting the fact-value distinction. What distinguishes values from facts is values are prescriptive, facts are descriptive. Now, when something is good, who or what is giving the directions? If you say it is us, then you fall into the same traps that befell Aaron Dawkins. Remember, we've come to the conclusion that goodness is objective. If you say it is natural states directing us, that sounds strangely anthropomorphic, and you are committing the naturalistic fallacy that we just went over. Natural states do not literally give directions, they don't talk, it does not have value judgment. The directions that come from values, from good in particular, must come from a source beyond us and from beyond the physical universe, for it really does not make sense in either of the other two scenarios. So, we have finally come to the point where I get to break out the Bible and give you a sympathetic reading of a passage. The first time good is spoken of in the Bible is in Genesis chapter 1, verse 4. Quote, God saw the light, that it was good, end quote. Now, the way I understand that passage, the light did not exist prior to God's vision of it. Likewise, goodness did not exist prior to God's judgment. It was good. I don't expect this reading from the Bible to win over my atheist friends, but keep in mind, the other possibilities have been shown not to work. Also keep in mind that goodness stemming from God's judgment both explains who's doing the directing, remember good is a prescription, and allows that prescription to be objective. Again, the other possibilities don't allow for that. So here's the logical structure I've laid out. There are exhaustively 3 possible sources for goodness. Possibility 1, good could simply be a matter of personal or interpersonal opinion. That is by you, yourself, or by a group. Possibility 2, good could be that which is established supernaturally. Possibility 3, good could be something which is established supernaturally. That is by the will of God. It has been shown that possibility 1 and possibility 2 are untenable. It hence can be concluded by disjunctive inference that God is the source of all that is good. The argument I've given you is logically valid. So regardless of whatever Aaron wishes to argue about God, Aaron must also show that either possibility 1 or possibility 2 are tenable in order to prove his position. Aaron cannot legitimately attack my argument by attempting to disprove the existence of God, for it follows from the argument that I've set that any instance of good is proof of God's existence. So, here's the take-home lesson for those of you enjoying a really good beer. Every time you drink a really good beer, you prove God's existence. God bless.
Our second speaker, we're trying to figure out if he and I are related. Aron Ra, Ra. It could be there. Aron Ra was the Texas State Director of American Atheists from 2012 until this weekend, and was recently elected President of Atheist Alliance of America. He's the host of the Ramen podcast and director of the Phylogeny Explorer Project. Aaron is one of the YouTube atheists and an advocate for rationalism in science classrooms. His videos promote secular education and skeptical thinking, often focusing on evolution and the evidence indicating an interrelated tree of life. His series summarizing the foundational falsehoods of creationism, among others, have been mirrored, featured, reinforced, and recommended by many professional scientists, secularists, and educators, and has attracted more than 130,000 subscribers to his YouTube channel. Additionally, all of Aron's financial support comes from patrons on patreon.com for anyone interested in supporting his work. Speaking to the topic, is God the source of all that is good? Please welcome Aron Ra.
I want to thank everybody for the enormous turnout where we seem to be at a capacity crowd, and I'm really happy about that. I also want to thank my opponent for choosing to defend an indefensible question, and for even making my job easier by opting not to present an argument that could support that. I'd also like to thank the Beer and Bible Consortium for arranging my first opportunity to have a public debate before a live audience. As I've never done this before. I don't even know if I'm going to be any good at it, so let's find out. Is God the source of all that is good? Of course, before we get argued this topic, we had to define what good is. The definition that I prefer is one proposed by Scott Clifton, better known on YouTube as Theoretical Bullshit. In a video that he made called A Treatise on Morality, he said that a particular action or choice is moral or right if it somehow promotes happiness, well-being, or health, or if it somehow minimizes unnecessary harm or suffering, or both. I like that definition. I think it applies to good, especially since the counter definition, of course, would be bad. While Mr. Lepp has a different definition, he has agreed that my definition does not contradict his, even though it does seem to contradict God. Is God the source of all that is good? Genesis 1:31. And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. So venomous stings and poisonous plants and infectious bacteria, mosquitoes, fleas, and crippling parasitic worms are not just good, they're very good. And don't give me that nonsense about the fall either. We know better than that because we've got fossils of dinosaurs that show symptoms of cancer millions of years before we made up fossils for the gods we invented. I could also point out that the galaxy extends billions of light years in every direction, and that of the trillions of galaxies, each of the trillions of galaxies have hundreds of billions of planets that could not support us, that we can only survive temporarily on a portion of the skin of this one mote of dust in an incomprehensibly vast cosmos that would kill us instantly everywhere else, proving that the universe was not created with us in mind. But we'll stick to biology. So we're talking about cheetahs chasing down gazelles and crocodiles ambushing anything that needed a drink of water, and giant eagles, lizards, and snakes eating children in the tropics. It is, as the poet Tennyson said, "Who trusted God was love, indeed, and love creation's final law, though nature, red in tooth and claw, with ravin shrieked against this creed." If you believe in God, then you believe that God made the plants so that they could create their own food, but he left us animals dependent on devouring other living things so that we would die in agony ourselves if we didn't violently kill something else. So pain and death and suffering, predation, starvation, and disease are all apparently good. According to God, every form of evil is, which of course brings us to the next question. Is God the source of all that is good or bad? Whether God is the source of evil as well may seem a trivial point to some, but it's important enough for me to bring it up. If God is the source of all that is, then that negates whether half of that is good. It would be pointless to bring it up without contrasting that with the balance to his dark side. And there are other problems with that I'll get to in a moment. If God were the source of all good, as we read in the sacred fables, then he's the source of all evil too. Isaiah 45 quotes God as saying, "I make peace and create evil. I, the Lord," oh, excuse me, I'm out of place. "I form the light and create darkness. I make peace and create evil. I, the Lord, do all these things." And this is according to the Bible, the Old Testament, the Tanakh, the common ancestor of all Abrahamic monotheism, including each of the many contradictory denominations of the three most violently conflicted religions, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. And when I was a little boy, I remember all I heard on the news was how Christians, Jews, and Muslims tended to kill each other everywhere they mingled, and very often killing themselves over which factless fantasy each faction liked more. So I had to wonder how it is that all these religions worship the same God of peaceful, loving forgiveness, and yet they were all at war with each other continuously, each since their inception. And it goes beyond the Abrahamic religions too. Hindus and Sikhs and pagans have all been locked in the violence of irrational beliefs and the reactionary hatred that typically generates. So it seems to me that if God was what so many of his followers say he is, then what we see cannot be. Because there are people who say that God is good, but according to Catholicism, which makes up over half of Christianity, they say that God is encumbered with over half of the deadly sins: vanity, jealousy, vengeance, and wrath. And these are not good. These are bad, as in immoral, as in evil. So what if it's a deistic God, and maybe it's responsible for everything, including the good nature of people who could never believe in gods and ghosts and things like that? Well, that would be a neutral God. But that wouldn't be the Bible God, would it? Because the Bible God will torture you mercilessly forever, not on the quality of your character or on the deeds you've done in life, but rather over what you believed, as if that even mattered. This is a central aspect of God's character, and it is neither righteous nor just. It is indefensible, unfair, and wholly evil. According to the Bible, whether you're damned or saved has nothing to do with morality. That's not what you're being judged on. You don't have to keep any of the hundreds of commandments, even though Jesus said that you had to observe every one. Jesus said that you had to follow all of these commandments in the Old Testament, that you had to keep the Feast of the Leavened Bread, sacrifice the first of your harvest to God, kill everyone who believes differently than you do, and don't make any artistic renderings of any living things, and so on. According to Jesus, if you disobey any of these 613 commandments, you will be considered least in the kingdom of heaven. But who cares what they call you as long as you get into heaven, right? Because sin doesn't lead to damnation, disbelief does. All that matters is whether you believe. It doesn't matter how evil you are. All sins can be forgiven if you but believe. But if you don't believe, then it doesn't matter how good you are, because the only sin that will not be forgiven is the sin of disbelief. Because the Christian God doesn't care about morality. Gullibility is the sole criteria for redemption. So is God the source of all that is good? Meaning, does God prompt or promote good? Certainly not according to the Bible. The Bible is a deeply repugnant tome which celebrates evil, promotes ignorance, and punishes wisdom as an abominable sin. But it doesn't just denigrate science or promote superstition, it also utterly fails as a moral guide, because it was written by ignorant and bigoted savages who condoned and promoted animal cruelty, incest, slavery, abuse of slaves, spousal abuse, child molestation, abortion, pillage, murder, cannibalism, genocide, and prejudice against race, nationality, religion, sex, and sexual orientation. Why? Just to justify their own inhuman bigotry and cruelty by claiming an unquestionable authority from a powerful genie that just happened to be one of their own imagining. Of course they were the chosen people. They chose that God to say so. Some religious leaders, including Mother Teresa, argued that suffering glorifies God, and that's why euthanasia and suicide are the only forms of killing the Bible doesn't endorse. And this is why Richard Dawkins said that the God of the Old Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character in all of fiction. Jealous and proud of it, a petty, unjust, unforgivable control freak, a vindictive, bloodthirsty ethnic cleanser, a misogynistic, homophobic, racist, infanticidal, genocidal, filicidal, pestilential, megalomaniacal, sadomasochistic, capriciously malevolent bully. According to biblical mythology, God set an inevitable trap for a naive couple who didn't know any better. If you have people that don't know the difference between right and wrong, they're going to do something wrong eventually. You don't have to have omniscience to know that. And you don't have to put the cursed tree where you know it doesn't belong, and you wouldn't if you were omniscient or expected any other result. You wouldn't put the talking snake there to seal the deal either. Now, in this debate, it's important what the Bible says, because so many people can't distinguish doctrine from deity. So that if you disprove the Bible, you disprove God, because they can't imagine how God can exist if the Bible were nothing but the fables of men with no truth to it, which is all the Bible is. There is no truth to the Scriptures beyond what moral you could have just as easily have gleaned from the fables of Aesop. So I realize that even if God exists, the Garden of Eden is strictly metaphorical. That's all it can be, with no connection to reality. But it always confused me as a kid how God could punish people who he knew didn't know any better, and he knew that he's the reason they didn't, and he's the reason that they did it. He set the trap, and then once it was sprung, he heaped on a bunch of additional punishments instead of what he said would happen. Can't God keep his word? Learning right from wrong is a good thing, so why would he punish us for something he should praise us for? And why is it a condition of our forgiveness that he can't forgive us until we do something unforgivable first, like killing Jesus on the cross, which is another thing that I don't believe really happened. For one thing, it's not unnecessary. For another, a scapegoat sacrifice is immoral as well. Why does unconditional love have so many conditions? It certainly isn't good. But if we hypothetically consider henotheism for a moment, that all religions have a kernel of truth, or that they all share some common truth, then we have to consider Vedic and other scriptures of Hinduism, the oldest religion in continuous practice. Even there, the Godhead is capricious and at times villainous. The Bhagavad Gita promotes the caste system. The Quran promotes child molestation, and both advocate the slaughter of unbelievers, just like the Bible does. So it doesn't matter which version of God you subscribe to, they're all so bad, none can be called good. So is God the source of good? Because there's clearly good in the world, but it clearly does not come from God. So there have to be other sources. My first public speech was a keynote explanation of the evolution of morality at a college in Florida at the invitation of the James Randi Educational Foundation. At that time, I explained that animals that are raised in dependence by a nurturing mother are also the species that show empathy for others, and that man is a social animal with an innate sense of compassion for our family, friends, and fellows. This is true of all social animals. Anybody with a dog should be able to see that. Those who collaborate and support the common good are the most beneficial and the most productive, while deviants tend to be ostracized, imprisoned, banished, or killed. So our concept of morality is actually an emergent property of population mechanics driven by very strong selective pressure. As a result, we've even developed mirror neurons to enhance our empathy with others, where those without that, and this is further advanced by overdevelopment of the frontal lobes, where those lacking that tend to be more selfish, short-sighted, cruel, and reactionary. All social animals, including humans, have a sense of compassion, which in some species leads to acts of devotion, defense, and even altruistic self-sacrifice on behalf of another, with or without God. That is written into us as a result of our evolution as a social animal. The God of the gaps argument, so commonly employed throughout fundamentalism, allows that a God is or does whatever science hasn't explained yet, so that once science has explained something, that's no longer attributed to God, in which case we got this. Religion has to pretend that we can't explain the emergence of consciousness or of morality, but science has explained these things and is the only thing that can explain them. But religion makes us go against our nature. For example, Nobel laureate Steven Weinberg famously said, "Religion is an insult to human dignity. With or without it, you have good people doing good things and evil people doing evil things, but to get good people to do evil things, that takes religion." Likewise, Voltaire said, "Those who can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities." And this is to say nothing of the heinous history of holy wars, inquisitions, and witch hunts, and every manner of subjugation, domination, and terror committed since then, nor of all the criminal negligence commonly and currently attributed to religion all over the news all the time. So while there's all of this hatred that is being performed in the name of God, as if God were the source of all that, God does not appear to be the source of any good. So for those who mistakenly believe that the Bible is the Word of God, despite all of its inconsistencies, absurdities, atrocities, and contradictions, let me remind you of the quote you are so fond of reciting for me. "The fool saith in his heart, there is no God." Psalm 14 and 53, because God repeats himself in a manner exactly like the absent-minded human scribes. From there, the passage continues to talk about atheists. They are corrupt. They have committed abominable deeds. There is none who does good, not even one. Now, this is an absolute statement, such that any exception proves it wrong. So if I mention the charitable donations of wealthy atheists like Bill Gates or Warren Buffett, or secular charities like the United Way, or humanitarian efforts like when the atheist community gathered together every year on Blog TV for a charity telethon benefiting Médecins Sans Frontières, each of these examples individually proves the Bible wrong. Our good clearly does not come from God. Is God the source of all good? Because some argue that it's not necessarily God who brings good, but rather belief in God that prompts people to do good. And the church may help meth heads by replacing one addiction for another. And they do offer a bit of fellowship to the deluded as long as they maintain the delusion. But if they ever have a bake sale or a charity drive, it is a PR stunt that is too little, too late to save their image as manipulative, oppressive, tax-dodging scam artists lying to children about things that can't possibly be true. Christians sometimes say that without the threat of an inescapable punishment from an indomitable despot, that humans have no compulsion to do good on their own. And they tell me that if they didn't think that there was a God to judge them, that they'd run around killing and raping as if that's supposed to convince me that they're the moral ones and I'm not. They know that I'm an atheist and I don't act like that. So why didn't Carl Sagan or Christopher Hitchens or even Jack Nicholson act like that? Think about it. Barry Manilow is an atheist. Bill Cosby is a Christian. In fact, there's a negative statistical correlation between religiosity and what we typically think of as moral behavior. Convicted felons are commonly estimated to be overwhelmingly religious, while the estimated number of atheists in prisons is always substantially lower than among free-roaming citizens. The factions of dominant religions statistically have the highest crime rate, with special emphasis on hate crimes. Religious people tend to support that prisoners should be tortured or killed, where non-religious people tend to say that that is morally wrong, but it gets worse. The most religious countries have the highest murder rate, and the same is true of the most religious areas of the United States. The higher the religiosity of a given populace, the higher the murder rate. Nations that are more secular show the opposite tendency. The less religious they are, the more peaceful they tend to be. Here in America, evangelical Christians have the highest divorce rate and the highest rates of teen pregnancy, especially where they teach abstinence only. Here in Texas, of course, we have the highest rates of repeat teen pregnancy. But it gets even worse. Students in private religious schools are statistically more likely to get an abortion than those in their peers in public schools. This is hypocrisy, and it shows what a failure the policies of the religious right have always been. But it gets even worse than that. Child Protective Services and other agencies report that a significant majority of child abusers and molesters identified as very religious, and the more religious they are, the worse offenders they are. Yet religious people argue that the less religious we are, the less moral we are. Because without God, they think we can have no objective moral standards. But God's morals are His own subjective, inconsistent, arbitrary opinions, or rather, the opinions of those criminal con men who are pretending to speak for Him. It can't be objective unless it is independently defined. So I submit that my definition of good is an objective moral standard such as God has never presented and that He can't live up to. Good is inconsistent with God. We are good without God because it's natural to be so, and it's getting more natural all the time. As Steven Pinker points out in his book, The Better Angels of Our Nature, history shows a consistent trend toward tolerance and away from violence. We're getting better all the time, but religion wants you to think that everything's getting worse and worse. Is God the source of all that is good? Is God the source of any good? Is God the source of anything? No, because there evidently is no God. Not only is there no evidence for God at all, not one objectively verifiable fact which is positively indicative of or exclusively concordant with that conclusion, but there is substantial evidence that every God ever imagined are just phantasms, creatures of the id, and that the Bible God in particular has been disproved because every testable claim the Bible makes has been disproved beyond redemption, such that not even the existence of God could redeem the Bible anymore. If there is a God, it would have to be a different God. And while there is no evidence of gods or ghosts or any of that, there are arguments. Arguments are not evidence, especially when all of those arguments are empty philosophical sophistry, pretending that we don't know what we know so that we can still make believe something else, or they're logical fallacies. Argument from ignorance and incredulity, argument from probability, appeal to authority, straw man, false dichotomy, anecdotal fallacy. Google the whole list. Every logical fallacy is an argument for God and vice versa. Asking whether God is the source of all that is good is itself a logical fallacy called begging the question. It's a circular argument routing back to an assumed conclusion, presupposing that a God exists. But it doesn't. The burden of proof is always on the one making the positive claims. Positive claims require positive evidence. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And that which is asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. This is what Christopher Hitchens called the fundamental rules of logic. It is dishonest to assert as fact that which is not evidently true, yet that's what all religions do. Every claim religion makes falls into one of two categories, not evidently true and evidently not true. There is nothing anyone can honestly say they actually know about God, because knowledge is demonstrable, it's measurable, it's testable with measurable accuracy. If you can't show it, you don't know it. It's not enough to assert that something is true. You have to show that it is. And if you can't show that you're right, you're not. One can't just say that anything is possible either, because there's many things that are not possible. And scientists determine whether something is possible by citing some precedent or parallel, or at least some verified phenomenon indicating that such possibility exists. So Mr. Lepp will not only have to show that his God is the source of every good, which we already know he can't do, but he will first have to show that his God is the source of any good. That's a knowledge statement, so he'll have to show how we know that. That means he'll have to show that his God actually exists and explain how it does anything, which again is impossible both for him and for his God. If he could show that, then he would win the Templeton Prize and the Nobel Prize and be a millionaire overnight, but that's not going to happen tonight. If you want to continue to believe in God, you're still going to have to do it on faith, because we are the source of all that is good. But we're also the source of God, and it's not a good God. But fortunately, it's not real either. There really is no God, and that's good.
We're going to transition now to cross-examination. If those speakers would pull their chairs into the table. 15 minutes. John Lepp will start. I will notify you when you are at the 10-minute, 5-minute, and 2-minute mark. My request is very simple. When you ask your question, wait for the other person to answer before you ask a second question. Beginning now, Mr. Lepp, please begin.
Well, congratulations on a great hatchet job for God being the source of good. But let's move on. I'm not sure I quite understood how you proposed to bridge the gap between descriptions and prescriptions. That was something I brought up in my paper. How do you propose to bridge the gap between facts and values, since you basically endorsed Dawkins and other things? You kind of did a Frankenstein's monster there, but how do you propose to bridge the gap between facts and values?
I don't understand why there's a problem with this.
Sure, I'll be happy to tell you. You described good being the source from biological processes. That's a fact. Those are factual. Values are different than that. Values are prescriptive. What you described was descriptive. You didn't describe to us the prescriptive part of it.
Did we not agree before this debate began on our definitions of good?
What we agreed on was that I was going to say quality, and I thought my definition encompassed yours. I'd never endorsed your definition. I said your definition works with the definition I gave. It doesn't conflict with it. It's a further specification of it, one that I do not agree with.
If my definition does not conflict with yours, then where's the problem?
Your definition is a subset of all that I offered in my definition. So it is a particular instance. I don't agree with your particular instance, but it's an example. So if I say good is that of positive value or worth, and yours is that good is don't show unnecessary harm, and then you describe it in a way similar to Sam Harris. You didn't use Sam Harris, you used a friend. I understand. Whoever you used, whatever the definition you used was.
Is that not objectively verifiable?
What?
We're talking about facts, right?
Right.
Now, I need to establish something that is factual. And when you're talking about having an objective...
Yes. You established something that was objective. Mm-hmm. What you didn't establish was something that was valuative. So I'm trying to get you to get to the value part of it.
Okay, so I'm not sure exactly what you're arguing here, because I need to establish an objective morality contra to your position.
Sure.
I think I've done that. You need
No,
to
you
have,
haven't shown us the value
I think you
part.
have to, in order to establish something, you need to have a definition. If you're going to establish what is good, you can't say that good is like, whatever is consistent with the nature of God. You need to have a definition of good that is independent of whatever God is. And then when you have that definition, we discover that God is inconsistent with the definition of good.
I agree with that, but I did not do that either. All that I offered as a definition was that good is that of valued of worth. It was very general. It was very vague. It encompasses your definition and encompasses God being the source of it. So it doesn't conflict there. I'll tell you what, let's move on, since I'm not going to get you to understand or agree to the fact-value distinction.
If I can verify that something is accurate, that's my value of it. I don't know what kind of a question you're leading toward.
It was a value as opposed to a fact. But I'll tell you what,
Unless I can verify it, then I have no reason to value it. The only value information has is however true you can show it to be. And if you can't show that it's true at all, then it has no value at all.
I'll tell you what, let's move on, because it actually agrees roughly where you're going with this. I just delivered a paper where I provided grounds to prove God's existence. Namely, by having a good beer verifies the existence of God. It looks like what proves God's existence to me is very different than what proves God's existence for you. So, are the rules of verification objective?
I would say that if you're going to talk about objective, I have a good beer, obviously that's, if you want to call that evidence of God, you're not using a definition or a dictionary that I do. Now I have to have an indication that such a thing actually exists. And the way I define evidence is a body of objectively verifiable facts which are positively indicative of or exclusively concordant with that one hypothesis. You haven't given that. You're having a beer. How does that imply that a supernatural anything exists?
I gave a whole long argument for that. If you missed the whole long chain of reasoning, that's not one for me to do again.
Okay.
But I'll tell you what.
Audience response. Did anybody feel that he gave reason to believe that a God actually exists? We have one hand raised. We have a full house and we have one hand raised. I don't feel terribly alone. Thank you for that.
Let's stick with cross-examination.
And you know what? I'm sorry I didn't persuade all of you, but I'm not arguing for
I don't think
truth by
persuaded him.
consensus. I'm
yeah.
arguing for truth by a good logical reason.
If you're talking about truth, then we have to have a definition of what truth is too. And for me, since we know that truth is defined as that which is concordant with reality, then before we can call something truth, we have to be able to show that it is concordant with reality, which means we have to show that it is true.
Okay.
You can't call it truth if you can't show that it is true.
I'll tell you what, I understand you going with a verifiability clause to the definition of truth. And I got that. And that's very well argued. People know it both sides of the fence. Some people say it is, some people say it doesn't exist. Okay. So I'll tell you what, let's keep going on here, because I'm happy to go on with verification. How do you propose we verify that Caesar crossed the Rubicon? How do you propose, while we're at it, how do you falsify our belief that Caesar crossed the Rubicon?
This is all going to depend on the measurement of positive claims require positive evidence, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. That's not two different categories. There's a sliding scale for that. So if we're not talking about an outrageous claim, if we're talking about something that is consistent with all the understanding that we currently have, then it's not an outrageous thing to believe if we have supportive evidence of that.
So it's not really much of a verification, but you realize that you're being kind of circular here. Namely,
How?
the laws of science are verifiable until people witness events which run counter to the laws of science. For instance, I take where you're going, but how's that any different than saying the disciples recorded Jesus walking on water?
How is that different? And I'm not sure about the Rubicon story. I'm not familiar with that. But are we talking about something that defies the laws of physics? Are we talking about something that was already attributed?
No, but we are talking about what corroborates a law.
Okay, are we talking about when Caesar crossed the Rubicon, was this something that was already attributed to a half a dozen different pagan gods before his time?
You know what? I have no idea of how many claims there are of people crossing the Rubicon.
Centuries before that?
And you know what?
Okay.
Whether there were many people that crossed the Rubicon, and maybe even if I crossed the Rubicon, that would have no bearing on Caesar crossing the Rubicon.
Would it have bearing on Indra walking on water many centuries before Jesus?
Believe it or not, no. For the truth claim still stands independent.
Okay, so my perspective on that is we have the story about Jesus turning water into wine, and then we have the story of Dionysus, who made a much better trick, by the way, because Jesus did the Penn and Teller trick where you pour the water into the jug, and then when you pour the jug out, it pours out wine. Anybody can do that, as Penn and Teller demonstrated. But what Dionysus did was he caused the fountains of the earth, the springs of the earth, to spring up wine. That's a much better trick. And he did it at least 500 years before Jesus.
But already
now,
you're
so
presupposing
logically,
value.
I'm
You're
not,
already presupposing better.
how am I presupposing that? And why
better.
are you interrupting the story
I'm
before I can
sorry.
make the point?
I'm sorry. I do
Okay,
apologize.
so logically then, either because why would God make his son a sequel to a human idea that was already popular in that area? So either Dionysus really could make water into wine just like Jesus could, or logically Jesus couldn't do it either.
And you know what? Whether Dionysus did it first doesn't prove that Jesus did it second.
Well,
It
you're not
doesn't, and
looking at the
besides which,
second
I'm
and
not
most obvious.
having.
You're
I'm
not looking at the
having-
second and more obvious option that Jesus couldn't do it either.
Or it could be this. Maybe God did it. Maybe Dionysus didn't.
And
It's
maybe
not-
Mickey Mouse did it before that. Why not? If we don't have evidence for anything.
For one thing, that there's similar claims does not have any bearing on whether one person did it. We're to analyze each truth claim individually.
Okay.
So
what reason, even if we didn't know about any past incidents of this,
Sure.
why would this obviously fanciful story, why would we take that seriously? Why would we believe that?
well, am I asking you questions now, or are you asking me?
Okay.
I'm happy to debate mythicism, but it's not the debate we're having now.
Okay.
Back to verifiability. I agree. There are defeaters. You can say these are prior myths, and I'm not here to debate with you the historicity of prior claims, the similarities of myths, the disagreements, whether they're defeaters. I can tell you, two truth claims about similar events does not disprove one or the other.
So you accept then that what I said before, that with or without a God, that our idea of morality is an emergent property of population mechanics under strong selective
No, I
pressures.
do not. How do you get that inference? Not at all.
Because
but
it was obvious
I'll
and
tell you what, I'm
demonstrable.
still asking the questions. So, back to verifiability, because I didn't really get an answer there. There's a whole lot of findings in science that are replicable, or not replicable. Big Bang, primordial soup, redshift sighting.
Redshift sighting is not replicable?
Hold on, let me finish.
Oh.
It's replicable. That's not what I'm saying.
That was in your list. Okay.
That one dimmer than expected is due to the distance and not it being. So there was a redshift sighting.
Okay.
It was dimmer than expected.
Okay. And you understand that not all galaxies are moving away because we actually have two galaxies coming into collision here. So it's really kind of a boiling mass at the same time.
No, there's different arguments every which way.
Okay.
But the question is, okay, how do you define life? Better yet,
You
how
want
do
an
you?
answer to that?
Here, I'm going to give you one.
Okay.
All animals are mortal. That is, they're going to die.
Mhm.
How do you come up with that conclusion empirically?
How do I come up with empirical observation that is consistent?
No. Verifiable.
You
The
just-
word is verifiable.
You just mentioned what could be described as a law of nature.
Right. So how
An
do you
observation-
verify that?
An observation that has consistently been shown to be true under all observations.
Doesn't show
And
that it applies across the board. That's called the problem of induction.
Can you find me an exception?
No, but I haven't looked at all animals either.
Then it meets the definition of a law of nature.
No, because you're always
Do
looking
you know
at
what the definition of a law of nature is? It's an observation that is shown correct on every
Of course I
every-
do. But what I am saying here is that what you're looking at is a small observed instance. You're not looking at the whole observed instance. What you're looking at is a finite sample, by definition.
So you're
that's the
telling
problem
me,
of induction.
You're telling me that that somewhere there are immortal animals that I'm not seeing?
I'm not telling you anything.
Well, what
What
could possibly
I am
be the
saying,
exception to the law of nature that you just described?
well, if you, for one thing, I don't know how you would verify it. For if you
By
saw an animal
constant
that was
observation.
how would you? You would only verify it upon seeing an animal dying. If the animal keeps living, you wouldn't
And
know
we've
it.
kept animals in captivity for
That have
thousands
died.
of years, and we've never had one that just stayed alive. Not even Darwin's tortoise.
But that's just a general suggestion. You've
It's-
never verified it.
We verified it thousands of times, millions of times.
Okay,
it's
back
a
to
law
the
of nature,
definition.
which means it's an observation that is always shown to be true, without exception. Can you name an exception?
Of course not. That's not the point of what I'm
I
getting
can,
at.
but that's not up to him.
That's not up to me. If you can't, go for it.
There's a tree that existed longer than our culture.
Okay, there you go. There you have it. Thank you, Aaron. But that's not the point.
But he was talking about animals.
Okay, living things. We have a whole bunches of things that we cannot verify.
Like?
We cannot even verify the definition of life.
Life falls under 7 criteria that you have to have.
It's
that
an ad
reproduces,
hoc
that
agreement.
It's biological. It's a biological definition.
That's
Look
not
it up.
agreed across the board.
Anybody watching
That
this
is
on
not
video,
across-
look it up. There are
And-
7 criteria. It has to grow. It has to reproduce.
And everybody
it has,
looking online see that it's still a general criteria.
it has to achieve homeostasis, which is a balanced internal chemical environment. Yes, there are 7 criteria for what describes life, and that last one is the most important. Another criteria of life is that it evolve.
I don't agree. Don't disagree. with
Okay.
you.
So you
what
asked the
I-
question, and this is
Before you
middle school
clap.
biology here.
And if you look beyond middle school biology, you will see that amongst the scientific community, there is no general consensus on the definition of life.
There's-
and that's within the natural sciences.
While-
and if you would be happy for me to bring you articles, I'll be
Gentlemen,
happy to send
I'm
them.
already aware of articles where, oh my gosh, I can't remember,
Yeah,
Richard
that's-
Dawkins and Lawrence Krauss and Venter were all having a conversation about what to define life in different categories than what we currently see. So they're talking about exobiology, things that are otherwise what we observe.
His time is over.
Okay.
Okay.
It's your turn. You ask the questions.
Okay. I only have like a couple of questions
Sure.
because,
Let him answer.
okay.
We're gonna keep going.
That's
Okay.
okay.
The questions from the floor will happen after this,
interject.
so let's engage each other.
Okay. What evidence can you provide that would cause any number of the people in this room to accept the belief in the God that you worship? Or any God?
Well, obviously none, if only one person agreed that my argument proved the existence of God. However, if you were to look over the argument, you would see that it is a logically valid argument. And that if you follow the argument and you were to go over it, it shows that every time you have instance of good, that shows there's a God. Now, if you don't accept the argument, then it does not prove the belief in God.
I believe I specified that arguments are not evidence.
But you need them in all types of verification arguments, including redshift, including theory of evolution. Those come with arguments. Yes, I couched it in empirical terms. I gave you an empirical instance. So you know what? Yes, you do need arguments, and you needed it for.
I'm not saying that we don't need arguments. You're saying that you don't have evidence.
I'm saying I do have evidence. Every
You
time
just
you
said
have.
no. Okay,
No,
what is the
I
evidence?
did not say that. I said.
All right, then I
let me
misunderstood you.
rephrase it.
What is the evidence that you have? And what is the objectively verifiable fact that is positively indicative of a supernatural, magical, anthropomorphic
I
immortal?
don't call it magic.
Okay,
However-
well, if we're going to look at what
However-
magic is, this is the evocation of supernatural forces or entities to control or forecast natural events, which in ways that are inexplicable by science because they defy the laws of physics. Magic and miracle have the same definition. Again, look it up. So when you say miracle, it means magic and vice versa. So
Okay.
magical, anthropomorphic, immortal, you have evidence to imply such a thing.
And I gave it to you in my argument. If
You
don't
gave an
accept-
argument, you didn't give evidence.
I did. I will give you the
It may
evidence.
be internally consistent, but it is not externally consistent.
It's
You did
externally
not-
consistent.
You did not show me a fact that indicates that conclusion.
Are you saying that good of value is not every time you have a good beer, according to the argument that I've given you, that's external. That is not just an independent.
Of course I don't agree with that. I thought it was nonsense. I was thanking you for not providing an argument against me.
And then you just fully rejected the argument. But
And I'm not alone.
Mormons hate bears.
Mormons hate bears. I'm not a Mormon.
And Muslims have problems with it too. So you talk about a large number of people that don't like your God.
Look, all that I've talked about here was limited to, is God the source of all that is good?
And
now
I would enter the question, is God? Let's just start from there.
But before we then, let me go answer your question.
That's the same question, essentially.
Is God? Yes. Now, next question. Is God the source of all that is good? Well, I congratulate you on a great hatchet job. A great hatchet job. But that has zero logical connection to whether there is a God. Likewise, it has zero connection on whether or not God could be the source of all that is good.
Yeah, you were arguing.
You did a great logical, you did a hatchet job. Oh, boo God. That's what your argument is basically reduced to. Yeah, God does all these horrible things.
No.
Yeah, I have no...
People do horrible things in the name of God.
Okay, you know what? I could even agree with you on
Okay.
that.
Can you show me that God does anything?
Sure.
Okay, what?
God established goodness.
Can you show me that you would have to show that there is a God and then show that he does something and then explain how he does something. But before we get to you explaining how he does something, show me that there's a God to talk about.
Hold up. No, I do not have to show that.
How you are arguing the position.
Hold up.
Yes,
no,
you
I do
have
not.
to do that.
Hold up. All
Don't
that I
start
had to
waving
show,
your finger at me. This isn't the Jeffersons. What's wrong with you?
You waved it at me. You waved it at me. Come on now. Who attacked who, huh? Look. You want me to... All that my argument has to show is that there's a supernatural source for good. I did that. And the way I did that, I will happily go over it again, is...
I'm going to have to go over it when I do the editing on this video. I will notify you if a light bulb appears.
I'll happily respond to that lady. Let me respond to that lady.
Okay.
Please stay focused on each other.
Look.
10 minutes.
Okay. Look, if you didn't think the argument was good, I do apologize. I do. But here's the thing. It showed, this is the argument, that that good can neither be established subjectively or naturally. Non-natural is not a property. It's not anything. It's an open slot to be filled. So your choices are, good could be established subjectively, naturally, or supernaturally. My argument showed that good cannot be established subjectively nor naturally. Now, all you've done, you haven't proven that good could be established naturally. If you did, then you would have to answer. I'm sorry. Let me finish.
Both that it
I'm
could
sorry.
be natural
I'm
and
sorry.
that it can be objective.
Hold up. Let me finish. If you did, you would have to answer, how do you bridge the fact-value divide? But you didn't, nor did you see a reason to do so. Why do you have to bridge the fact-value divide? Because facts are descriptive and values are prescriptive. So you have a divide to go over. So if you're going to go over verified fact, which we do not disagree about, then yes, you do have to bridge the divide, but you didn't.
Okay. I have no doubt that after this debate, Matt Dillahunty will pull me aside and give me a full philosophical lecture on whatever point that I may have missed. But the important thing for me is that you still haven't addressed that there is a reason to believe that a God even exists, and nor have you given a reason for any of the compiled assumptions you've added onto that he actually does things.
Why do I believe God does things?
Why do you believe God? Let's start that.
No, let me answer the first question.
The
reason why I believe God is because I believe God does things. So
circular.
let me not circular.
I believe God because I believe God. That's not circular.
I
Is it
believe
triangular for you?
Excuse me. I believe God because I believe God has done things. That's not circular.
You said you believe God has done things because you believe God has done things. You just use it along
I'm
the
sorry,
sentence.
then that was a misslip. I believe God because I believe God has done things. So, just like I believe you exist, just like I believe the people in the audience exist, I have experienced God. You could laugh, you could do whatever you like, but I have experienced this.
I've experienced that too, unfortunately, and I've experienced a hell of a lot of other paranormal sort of things. And it took me a long time to realize how those can be reproduced and how easy it is to fool people when you use faith, which is the most deceptive tool that we've ever applied. It's auto-deceptive.
I'm sorry. Faith, let's define faith.
Faith is an unreasonable assumption that is assumed without reason and defended against all reason.
It's not the definition I use.
No doubt.
I use the biblical.
But it is going to be a firm conviction that is not based on evidence.
I'll give you one that's based on evidence.
I'm still waiting for that evidence.
I'm just trying to give you the definition of faith.
Can you give me the
first.
evidence? Because I
Sure.
don't think I'm going to believe your definition if you don't give me the evidence first.
Excuse me. Let me. The evidence. I'm giving you a definition of faith.
Okay, give me
All
that.
all that this is an agreement on convention. That's how words work here. So, in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1, faith is defined as follows. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the convictions of things not yet seen. You used faith yourself when you. Let me finish.
I'm just moving my eyes. That's it.
All right. Thank you for moving your eyes. I'm sorry, I thought that was indicative of something, but I guess not.
It is.
Good. So I was right to respond. So, when you took your small sample pool of animals tested on, some living in cages, as being proof that all animals are mortal, that's a leap of faith. I agree with it. I don't have any problem with it. I think that I agree 100% with it.
Okay, so my studies of cellular senescence are
But
also
it's still, you're still expanding it to all and any. You are doing that. You are going beyond things seen. You are having faith in the principle of verification.
When I study cellular senescence, we found species of fish and of turtle that don't age. Neither of them age, and this is because of this is the way that the cells break down, and it doesn't happen in these two animals. However, they still eventually succumb to disease or to predation or to accidents.
And I agree with Hubble.
And when you have to look at it, mathematically, it doesn't matter if you are immortal. If you can still succumb to disease or injury, you're eventually going to die. If you live at all, you're going to kill yourself. You're going to live to death.
Well, all you've just said is that there's a probability of death.
5
But
minutes.
each point you've never
at some
verified.
point, it becomes inevitable.
Inevitable how? How did you get the inevitability? That's not a logically verified.
Yeah, what is the probability that you're going to die in any given year?
Oh,
Increase that
100%.
probability every year, right? Eventually, it's going to be inevitable.
No, actually, if
So
you
this is
wait,
not faith.
stop. If you do the math on that, no, it never
Okay,
comes to 100%.
I just want to contest that every time I ever talk to a religious believer, it seems that they're aware of how disingenuous faith is because they always want to accuse it of me. But I'm an epistivist, which means that I object to faith as the most dishonest position it is possible
But you're
to
still
have.
using it.
I'm not. I
You
refuse
are.
faith. Any
Excuse
belief
me,
that
you never
require-
got to 100%
every
on your
faith-
definition.
Every
You've
belief,
never come to 100%.
every belief that requires faith
Hey, I
must
love your
be
singing, but
rejected
that doesn't
for that
doesn't
reason.
mean you're telling the truth.
But I always tell the truth. I am the ghost who never
No.
lies.
Bull. Come on now, don't lie in
But
front
what
of
I
the
just
audience.
said is correct.
No, it
is
doesn't
not
add
faith.
up to. It doesn't add up to 100% ever.
Yes, it does.
No, it doesn't. It can't.
Even
It
in the
can't.
cases where the cellular senescence doesn't provide aging, we still show that it still happens.
Look, there's a
Eventually,
conceptual
it's
point.
going to happen.
This is a conceptual point that we're not going to come to an agreement on.
If you play in a video game, your character doesn't die of old age, but eventually it dies, right?
That's an inductive proof. I agree with it. It's
Okay.
inductive.
So I'm not being dishonest. I'm saying something that is correct, and you're still trying
No,
to
you're saying
project
it's
your faith
inductive.
onto me.
I'm
I
saying
wish believers would stop trying to project their faith onto me.
you don't understand. I'm not projecting your faith. I'm
You
trying
told me
to have.
that I use faith. I do not.
You do.
By demonstration, by definition, I
You
clearly
just
do
used
not.
induction. It's inductive.
That's not faith. Faith is a belief that is not based on evidence.
Induction is faith. It's a projection on, it's an inference from X amount of inferences to the future. That's called the problem of induction. I didn't invent this, and if you ask Richard Dawkins, he too accepts it.
Okay, there are a half a dozen more references in the Bible that also describe faith as as seeing things that aren't there, or not seeing what is seen, and so forth. And the Bhagavad Gita does the same thing, praising faith as a belief that is not based on evidence. The Quran also praises the same thing. All of the major religions hold to the same definition of faith as you do. Martin Luther certainly did, that faith is against reason. All of the leading theologians, past and present, all hold to the same definition. I do not believe things that do not have reason to support them. I have to have a reason to convince me.
I didn't give that as a reason.
Okay, give me the reason to convince me that there is a God. And if you can't, then don't criticize me for believing things on faith.
Okay, I gave you one. You didn't like the argument, but I gave you one.
I'll
give
evidence,
you more.
Not arguments. Give me evidence. Give me a reason to believe you.
2 minutes.
Okay, I'll give you a reason. It's my testimony, but there's a lot of other testimonies that corroborate it. And furthermore, I would say that every time...
Did you hear the eyes rolling?
Sure. And you know what? Here's the point that I would make to all the rolling eyes. When you do that, you also do that with repeatability in science. You also do that with any empirical study. So can I verify? Can I offer a repeated instance? Yeah, there's lots of believers. And in fact, when people saw Jesus walk on water, you know what? That's not new. When people saw Jesus on the third day come back to life and be walking amongst them, you know what? That is witness testimony.
Okay, I got 2 questions for the audience by response by applause.
Oh, no.
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 Okay.
And my answer to that is no. No offense to the audience, but this is not about truth by consensus. It isn't.
I just suspect that a large number of this audience are former Christians, and that many of them used to have testimonies like yours.
Sure. And you know what?
My testimony was better than yours.
Great, and I applaud you too, Aaron. But here's the thing. The whole idea of good, bad, better, worse, you haven't given any logical basis for. And every time that I try to get it out of you, you go back to the verification thing. And every time I talk to you about the intricacies of verification, you make some snide remark and the whole audience claps. Look, it's not about me playing to the audience. I was trying to have a reasoned, good argument with you, not one that evokes the whole laughter of the audience. I have no skill in that. This is my first time debating live. I have no... Yeah, and you know what? You've been in front of audiences lots. I have not. I have not. So no, don't pretend this is your first. Whether it's your first formal, that's beside the point.
Okay, I'll be gentle.
Be gentle with me. This concludes cross-examination.
Ooh.
We are now going to take a 10-minute break.
Oh.
Put large stacks of money on the bar. Look at that guy right there. Look at him, huh? He's waving. We're going to give him lots of money. We'll be back in 10 minutes. Yeah. We'll be back in 10 minutes with Q&A. 10 minutes. We will begin here.
Hello, Mr. Lepp. Thank you so much for coming out to... Oh, sure. Thank you for coming out. It was really nice to watch. My question for you is, you mentioned that values have to be prescriptive.
Sure.
And I'd like to return to that because I don't necessarily believe that they should or have to be. So what is your reasoning for saying that values are prescriptive when they could in
Sure.
fact be descriptive?
Well, first, I should tell you where I got the values are prescriptive. It's part of the is-ought divide, David Hume. But it was not only that. Oh, it wasn't Freddie Ayer. It was directly ripped off of someone famous, but atheist. And I picked someone famous and atheist who provided an emotivist theory of value. But it wasn't Freddie. It was someone else at Oxford. So I'm sorry I'm forgetting his name. But I thought, well, if he says it, and he's an Oxford professor, I'm going to go with him.
Okay, but there's not really a consensus about values being prescriptive.
Well, what I would say is this. I thought it got at the gist of what makes good good. It's that it provides a little endorsement. And I mean, I was trying to think of what makes good good as opposed to red or some other property. And it's that it does urge something like an endorsement, even if you were to go to like Aristotle. When Aristotle defined good, it was that it fulfilled a teleological function. It served a necessary end. I didn't want to go that way because that was assuming a philosophy I don't take, but the idea of it was that it was urging something towards something. So that's why I took that tack.
Okay, well, thank you.
Question from Mr. Ra.
Hi, Aron. I apologize in advance if you answered this and I just missed it. But did you make the claim at all, or do you make the claim that morality is objective, and what did you say about where it comes from?
The way that morality can be objective is only if you have a definition of what is moral or good and it is independent of God. So that you can then measure God versus the definition to see if God himself is moral or good.
Okay, I think that kind of speaks to the first part, but what would you say to where our sense of morality comes from?
It's an emergent property of population mechanics. Because we evolved as a societal species, what we do for the betterment of the society is what is encouraged. And obviously deviations who are selfish and only out for their own interests tend to be ostracized. So when you look at population mechanics, you see that those who are socially minded or pro-social tend to be favored, they tend to be dominant. So what you end up with after not too many generations is people who have a great deal of concern for other people.
I think that answers my question. Thank you.
Question submitted online from Mr. Ra from Gordon. So faith can't be based on reasonable evidence? Can't you have evidence but not 100% evidence? And if so, isn't that faith?
You either have evidence or you don't. I don't understand that. I mean, you can have good evidence maybe, and you can have unreliable evidence. I mean, I had unreliable evidence that held me in religious beliefs for a great many years, and it all turned out to be bogus. But faith is a belief that is not based on evidence. It's the difference between belief and make-believe. See, I understand faith to be a belief where you're going to believe what you want to believe, and it doesn't matter what the facts are.
Daniel Jackson and I just shot a commercial for Gillette razors, and I'll let you guess who was the before and after.
Hi, John.
Hey, Daniel.
You spoke at length in your presentation about genital mutilation, and I trust that your opinion of that is that genital mutilation is indeed objectively wrong. Is that correct? So would you also agree then that any sort of being or entity that commands or insists on genital mutilation is also objectively wrong?
No, I do not.
Could you explain that, please?
Sure.
Good luck.
Easily done. Not even sweating it. Sure. It's this way. The objectives on which you are to follow of what makes good good has to have a standard lawmaker.
Pause 1 second. Is there a doctor available, someone to spell in the back? Thank you. Please continue.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry to hear that. Sure, I'd be happy to go back to this. So it is basically what makes good good needs someone giving the standard. It's not just a free-floating standard. There has to be someone giving the prescriptive, do this, don't do that. Of course, my whole argument was that you can't rely on biology to do it, and you cannot rely on, what was it that Plato said again? Mere emotions to settle the score.
So just to make sure I understand, are you basically saying that when it comes to God, it's do as I say, not as I do?
No, he's saying that it's only okay when God does it.
No, actually, I'm saying, in terms of that, believe it or not, yes, I actually do believe that. It's this. God does not run by the same standards as man. Part of what you like to talk about is actually a problem that was dealt with in depth in the book of Job. Believe me, you're not the first person to come up with this. This was brought up, the first book that was written for the Bible. Job was saying, how could you do this? And God said, well, look, are you judging the maker of the universe who's done all this? And there's other places where God says, what was it, in Proverbs? No, where he said,
So
I'm sorry, I'll happy to answer you in a second. Get more than
it's your question. Go ahead.
All right. So yes, there are places where your mind is not my mind. You are not like me. So yeah, the laws for God governs the laws. God is not ruled by the laws.
All right, thank you.
I would so love to comment on that.
You get to.
Go for it.
Okay.
Really fast, please.
Okay, so genital mutilation is objectively wrong, and God commands it. So God commands things that are objectively wrong.
Right.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
And the static was perfect.
Let me answer that. Yeah, it's a good, quick, glib point. Oh, God commanded something that is objectively morally
and
wrong.
pointless and purposeless.
Let me go answer the first thing. Please allow me to answer without interjection. Yes, God commanded something that wasn't for him to follow. It was for us to follow. Yeah, God can break the laws that were designed for us, not for him. There's no logical contradiction there.
I would love to just add one point. If anybody has ever seen the Gospel of Thomas, which is one of the Coptic Gospels, there's an account of Jesus where Jesus is asked about circumcision, and he gives this brilliant answer where he says, if God wanted men to be circumcised, they wouldn't be born with foreskins.
And that's the Coptic gospel. Look, I'm not going to answer there's a lot of points within any number of gospels that can be wrong. You have to have the Spirit guide you to what is correct. Am I able to give you the correct one? No. Does that answer anything about, is God the source of good? No.
Okay, well, the problem with letting the Spirit...
Hang on, Dr. Zach, take us out of the context of foreskin, please.
Professor Ra,
Thanks so much for your participation here tonight. It's very entertaining.
Thank you.
But as you see, I'm standing here with some of the evidence that Mr. Lepp provided. This is a very good beer.
It's crap. It's a crap beer, and any Zymergist can tell you that.
You know, but it's in my mind, maybe I'm being subjective here, but I think it's a good beer. And so this is presented as evidence for the existence of God, because there's no other way that this could be good if it were not for the existence of God. You have, in your statements, you have rejected this as evidence. But I'm wondering, what would you accept as evidence? What is, in your mind, good evidence and perhaps the best evidence for the existence of God and the existence of God doing something that's good?
As I've said so many times, I'll accept anything that qualifies as evidence. Any objectively verifiable fact which is positively indicative of or exclusively concordant with that hypothesis over any other.
Any examples, potential, hypothetical?
For a God?
For anything, like God being good, God producing.
If we were going to talk about different subjects, I can cite evidence for, but if we're talking about God, nobody can cite evidence.
So nothing then.
I will accept anything that qualifies as evidence. Let's see if he has any.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Lepp, you quoted Scripture several times. I assume you believe in the inerrancy of Scripture.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear you.
You quoted Scripture several times.
A few times,
Old
yes.
and New Testament, okay. Yeah. You're probably familiar with Is God a Moral Monster by Paul Copan?
Absolutely, I know Paul.
A great apologetic book, and
Sure.
in Numbers it has God killing the women, the children, the camels, whatever they did. And, they get you out of that problem by saying, well, they sacrificed to Molech, God gave them 400 years to repent. They have an answer to everything, but the last part of that verse in Numbers says, and take the women that have not been with men and keep them for yourselves. So my question is, does that sound like God saying that? Or does that sound like some chauvinistic Bronze Age Jewish male saying that? Which is it?
It's what I would say. First, let me go off on what Paul said, that there was a lot of stylistic braggadocio going on with that. It would seem to me that, with anything that's written by humans has a human element to it, and that has a disgusting element to it. Does this say that the Bible is inerrant? Believe it or not, you can still have inerrancy. The idea is what is the lesson there? What is the point that was getting pointed across? Now, I don't know this scripture well enough to get across what is the lesson that God was trying to teach. But I would say that, does this point more to human failing? Yes, it does.
If I could
Yeah,
comment
sure.
on that, the passage you're talking about from Numbers 31 does not say women. It says women, children. And other translations say infants. And others say little ones. So when you talk about Jewish tradition, the dividing line between the women children and the women adults was 12 years old and 1 day. So we're talking about preteen children
Right, but
who
God
are
is
being
still
kept
trying to take...
kept alive purely for the purity of their sex.
Right,
Sure.
It's still sex slaves. God likes sex slaves, right? Am I right, Aaron?
Yeah.
Okay, can I respond to Aaron? And this is actually one thing I actually did predict in writing. So thank you, Aaron. Aaron. Sorry, too sophisticated. You are using the 3-card monte of logical objections, the shell game of logical objections. It works off of misdirection. Like something you would watch get off of Penn and Teller, since you mentioned them earlier, and I predicted that you would mention Penn and Teller. So I got that. Yes, thank you. So let's take a look at the moral monster argument from the standpoint of believers, atheists, and agnostics. Let me start off by giving a working definition. Please don't interject, let me just give it. You can attack it later. God is the supernatural agent above all. Not a great definition, admittedly, but it gets the point across that God is above mankind. Now, for believers, we cannot really blame God for any of those acts we find deplorable. That God would act in ways that defies our understanding is to be expected by a God who is greater than us. But here's the thing. So we're not in a position to judge God. But here's the thing. Atheists also cannot actually blame God for any of those acts that they find deplorable. For if God does not exist, then he could not have performed any of those acts. Finally, for agnostics, as would follow from their name, they straddle both the atheist camp and the believer camp. They either could not find fault with God because they believe he can act in ways that defies their understanding. That is, they don't have all the necessary or sufficient conditions on which to blame God, or they would not be able to fault a non-existent agent. So, this is why God is a moral monster, is the three-card Monty of logical objections. God is not a moral monster if you're an agnostic, atheist, or believer. The only way you can come up with God being a moral monster is by the misdirection from the horror felt by atheists counterfactually about God's acts and by the acceptance of God's existence by believers. Hence, it's a misdirection. You're putting together like Frankenstein's monster.
All right, so what I'm doing is not a misdirection at all. All of the different versions of the Bible do describe these as being underage girls by our standards.
And I'm not saying otherwise.
Right, but you're also saying something about agnostics, because you know what agnostic means? It means you don't know you're an atheist. Is really what that means, because most of the people who identify as agnostic are actually atheists and don't realize it. But you can also be an agnostic theist, where you don't know which God it is, but you believe there's a God out there. It's very wishy-washy. But yeah, an agnostic can either be theist or atheist, but you're either convinced there's a magical anthropomorphic immortal, or you're not convinced. There is no middle ground. You're atheist or you're theist. That's it.
Okay, then my argument still works. For it worked with the atheist and it worked with the
reason your argument does not work is because we have an objective moral standard, which, such as I have already brought up earlier this evening, by which we can judge God and rule that he is immoral by our objective standard.
Aaron, you're not going to win with Christian apologists. Sorry.
I learned that lesson.
Sure.
Art, I have a question for you, and that is, you talked about the morality, the concept of good and evil as being an emergent property of evolution, which I think would imply that would be according to species boundaries. Crocodile probably doesn't see it as immoral to pull a gazelle into the water and eat it, is an example that you provided. So could you provide possibly an objective basis for determining a universal human morality, or the distinction between good and evil that would be somewhat universal to the human species?
Yes, I give that with my definition, where a particular action is moral or good if it prolongs health and happiness, or a particular action is evil or bad if it causes unnecessary harm and suffering. Now, your crocodile only has to eat once a month, but it does have to eat. It doesn't have an option. And it doesn't have a digestive tract that will allow it to eat plants, because God didn't give it that option, so it required that it had to kill things in a horrible, horrible way. So the morality is that we have to, in order to survive ourselves, we have to kill other organisms. And people who believe themselves to be moral still keep animals in horrible conditions, for the meat market and so forth. I'm not saying that people are inconsistent. People are clearly inconsistent, but there's still an objective moral standard that we can hold people to as well as God.
Thank you.
Question follow-up from Gordon for Mr. Ra. The Big Bang, which is based on evidence but not 100% evidence, isn't that faith?
No, because it's based on evidence. If we know that the universe is expanding, or all of the indications that we see indicate that the universe is expanding, then obviously if we track time back, then it was retracting back to a particular position. And physicists who can go into math farther than I can show that it's coming to a single point, so that all time and space come to a single point. Now, they can give evidence to provide these conclusions, and I'm at a loss not being a Big Bang fan myself, I have to accept that that's the best explanation they have because I don't have a better one. I don't have a better explanation for the evidence they present. The cosmic microwave background radiation, that was predicted by this theory, for example.
From my bearded brethren.
Let me get on my tippy toes here. Mr. Lepp, so can you speak up a little? Yes. In your opening statement, you gave us 4 arguments for good. You tried to disprove 3 of them, and then we were left with the 4th by saying, okay, then this one must be correct because the other 3 are not. Isn't that an argument from incredulity?
I'm sorry. He asked if it was an argument from incredulity.
Because isn't there other options? I mean,
well, I was trying to make the categories broad, so I wanted to be not incredulity, but disjunctive inference, which is a perfectly valid inference. So it wasn't incredulity. I was trying to go with broad definitions.
Right, but it still ended up with an assertion that God even exists. So that's.
But the argument wasn't to prove that God exists. The argument was to prove that God is the source of all that is good, and I provided.
So then the
basically,
source.
I kicked out one option, and there was 3 other options.
Right.
The way you got it was from disjunctive inference, which is a perfectly legitimate inference.
Okay, so the source of good is something that is non-existent. Then, is that what you're saying?
Well, no, it's that it wouldn't be that. If God is non-existent, then he wouldn't be verified by the instances of good. So that
in that circular though, in that it's by saying God is good because good is God. Isn't that kind of a methodology there?
God is the source of goodness, therefore God. That's not circular.
That's not.
That's not circular. God is the source of good. There is good, hence there is God. Not circular.
Okay, thank you.
Question, Mr.
Sorry,
Ra.
it's not.
Mr. Ra, thank you for doing this. I appreciate your candor. I just have a question. You were talking about morality, and I'm going to kind of go on that. You said there is objective morality. I'm going to kind of take his argument a little farther. Instead of the female genitalia mutilation, I'm going to borrow an argument here. Would you say that it is wrong all of the time for anyone to torture and kill babies simply for pleasure, and why?
Why is it wrong to cause unnecessary harm and suffering, which is the very definition of morality?
Well,
where's the justification for that? Where's the necessity for that?
What I'm trying to figure out is atheism doesn't allow for anybody to say anything is right or wrong.
What? Wait. Yes. I'm standing here as an atheist arguing
morally
for morality.
Speaking.
So how can you say that atheism doesn't allow for morality?
Well, on what basis do you say that is wrong?
The objective reason that I gave, that it's not authoritarian circular logical fallacies like my opponent here has been giving, that we have a definition of what is moral, a universally accepted one. Regardless of what your culture is, you would agree with the definition that I gave of what is good and what is bad, what is moral and what is immoral. Now, people will try to deviate from that, and religion often causes people to do so. But outside of the deviations that are brought about by religion, people do consistently agree with these. And on male genital mutilation, they give they always give an excuse for some, health reason for why they do it. But it's a bogus reason. And so very often you have accidents occurring from this. They don't have a reason to do this in the first place. I don't think ever. I won't exclude that there could be a possibility, but to my knowledge there isn't one. And nobody's ever given me a reason for why male genital mutilation should ever happen. But in the course of doing that, you have a child who's undergoing a severe pain to an extremely sensitive part of the body without anesthetic, because they don't do that. Then you have the rabbi sucking the blood out. How weird is that? And then they screw up every once in a while so that the kid ends up with no dick. That's a pretty big damn deal. And what's the reason? Oh, because it's tradition. I'm sorry, that's the stupidest argument ever. There's no justification for it. No God worth worshiping would ever suggest such a thing.
Well, I'm not.
I'm sorry. It's a sore spot with me.
It's okay. But my argument is, where is that standard of morality that people accept universally that this is wrong? Where would you get that from? Because is Hitler's standard of morality right or wrong? And on what basis would you say that
Is Hitler
right
causing
or wrong?
unnecessary harm or suffering, or is he not? Clearly, he was causing unnecessary harm and suffering.
But
right?
But he had Germans that agreed with him.
He
and
did
carried those
have
things out.
Germans who agreed with him.
So if it was right for them in their culture,
In their isolated culture, and I'm talking globally,
So it's
I'm
not
talking
right
through
for
the entire species, right? You do have deviations. As I said, religion is the primary culprit. You can also have nationalistic means to also cause people to do evil. We've seen both the fascists and the communists have in their day also done evil, not just religion. But these are deviations. Okay, and globally, cohesive people understand you don't cause unnecessary harm or suffering.
but they didn't agree with you.
So,
Well, then who are you to say that they're wrong?
I said globally, and you have deviations.
But they would be considered
So-
globally, correct?
No, they would be considered deviations. 6 billion people, and how much do they represent? Well, actually, at that time, there was only like 2 billion people, but still, how many people do they represent out of that population? And most of the people in Germany didn't even know that was going on. So we're talking about a severe minority.
But what classifies as a deviation? Where
Well,
does
these
that-
people
where
are
does that
acting on,
basis come
whether
from?
they're acting on fascism, whether they're acting on communism, or whether they're acting on religion, or some other cause of disease, there's still a deviation. And it can be seen as a pathology.
I'm still not seeing.
Okay, so
where
Nazis were sick people. Okay?
we would
Healthy
say that.
people.
But
Yeah,
if there
not
was
just
not
us.
like a moral
Not just us,
standard
but a
across
global.
the board, no one
right.
has the right to say
Right.
that. If there's not a
Globally,
moral
we would all
standard.
agree that you don't just go out and kill people because you don't like them for whatever bigoted reason. Globally, we would agree on that. You're going to find deviations because there are defective people all over the world. But you're going to have this mass of people, the species as a whole, predominantly always holds that you should not be cruel to other people without justification, without need to be, without it being a matter of self-defense, for example.
So what I'm asking is, what would define a deviation?
What I just told you 4 times.
But-
I'm sorry, I don't mean to be rude about this.
No,
but
no. I'm just trying to understand. That's all.
Okay.
What would constitute a deviation from the moral standard? Where's the moral standard?
Okay, so we
come
have a
from that
definition.
everyone would apply.
We have a definition of what is moral, right? And I gave that in my presentation, right? And so anybody that works against that is obviously a deviation of that. Okay, so we have people that are supportive of their community. We have people that are helpful and altruistic and generous. And then we have people that are selfish and cruel. But the selfish and cruel tend to be ostracized by being imprisoned, by being shunned, by being banished, or by being killed. So this is why predominantly people care about each other, because it is an emergent property of being evolved as a social species.
But not everybody holds to the same
Not
standard.
everybody, because there are deviations. Not everyone is sane, and there are certain other things that will cause a pathology. Religion historically has been a pathology causing people to do horrible things. So has communism and fascism. Different types of nationalism can do that.
Right. I would agree with that, a small percentage.
Question from Mr. Lepp.
Hello there, John.
Hi.
So you mentioned that God is the source of all morality.
Whoa, wait a minute. How many beer have you had?
I'm good.
Okay.
You mentioned that God is the sole source of morality.
I didn't. I said God is the sole
Or
source
God
of
is
good.
the source of morality.
Of good.
Of good.
Of good.
Okay. You also mentioned that female genital mutilation is bad, which is held by Muslims as good based off of a God-dictated standard. Well, I too believe that God is the source of all good, but as a Pastafarian, I believe that it's the flying spaghetti monster instead of your God. What evidence can you give me that it's your God that's the source of good and not the one that just wants you to eat spaghetti on Wednesday?
Sure, I'm happy to argue against the Pastafarian, but I would say this. My argument does not delineate what the supernatural source is. Whether it is one God, whether it is a pasta God, whether it is a source of a million gods acting together in unison, that's not the point of the argument. So unfortunately, my argument doesn't solve the many and the one, nor does it solve which supernatural source would be the source of good. I applaud your argument because it actually concurs with my argument. Now, the further argument, well, why shouldn't I believe in the pasta God as opposed to your God? I would leave that, talk that over with your local deacon, priest, whatever. Talk that over with anybody. Talk to me afterwards. But that's not the subject of the debate. The debate is, what is the source of God? I mean, what is the source of good? I say it is God. Now, which God? Unfortunately, this argument does not address. It's not designed for that. I apologize.
And neither of you are going to understand true slack until you accept Bob.
Sir, I wish I had half your energy. You were awesome. Question for Mr. Ra.
All right, I'd like to ask you a question entirely from a naturalist perspective. So it does seem to me, I like to think through this, if I was a naturalist, what would I think about ethics? And I've taken several courses in ethics, I read a lot of texts on my own, I engage in many discussions. And it seems to me that very difficult to accept that there can be moral propositions bearing truth values in some Platonic or naturalistic sense. And I'd like to provide 3 reasons why, and I'd like to hear your response. The first off is that whenever we have something that is necessarily true or false, we see that carried out through all of nature. So mathematical laws are completely consistent throughout all of nature. We don't see natural laws deviating from mathematical laws. However, we do see deviations of behavior all throughout nature. For instance, there are many animals that kill for sport, where the only reason why they inflict harm is because it brings pleasure to the animal. We see animals that consume their young, other animals that consume their parents, so cannibalism. Just about every kind of abhorrent behavior that can be enacted by a non-cognitive animal is enacted, even though those same behaviors we would consider very abhorrent if moral agents enacted them. The second reason is that when we say that morality is set by some kind of global or cultural consensus, is that seems to be guilty of committing the logical fallacy, the informal fallacy of argumentum ad populum, which is just because something is popular or prevalent that it must be true. The third reason is what's known as reformer's dilemma. What do we do when someone like a Martin Luther King Jr. comes along and he's actually arguing against the popular moral view, or choose whoever you want, Gandhi, anyone who's trying to change society to get them to move away from slavery, racism, suppression of rights, you name it. At the time that they begin that quest, they normally are against the populace. They are that deviation, they are that minority. Yet we don't seem to want to say that they're immoral. We want to say that they're the moral ones and that the populum is moral. So it seems to me that morals would just be sort of statements of our preference, whether they be individual, cultural, philosophical, whatever. I'd like you to convince me that morals are more than those subjective preferences or those psychological, emotional preferences.
Okay, so did you have the impression that I come up with the definition of what was good or moral based on everyone agreeing with that and not the fact that there is reasons why everyone agrees with that?
I didn't want to say that you were resting entirely on it being argumentum ad populum, which is why I listed several others.
But my point is that there are reasons why people agree with that. It's not just that everybody agrees with that, so this is so. There's reasons why people agree with this. And so this is an objective verification that we can use.
Okay,
and so nobody that is arguing against slavery was ever the immoral deviant because slavery was immoral to begin with.
Okay. But there's values that kind of precede those reasons. So I think all humans are equal, therefore slavery is wrong. So the value comes before the sort of moral principle, if you will.
But it still defies the definition, doesn't it? Causing unnecessary harm or suffering, right?
Right, but again, that does not seem to be metaphysically true because in nature, we see nature is very inconsistent with that. We see killing for merely the pleasure of the killer all throughout nature. So
but we don't see that as the norm. We see that as the deviation. And as I said, there are deviations everywhere, largely because there is no God.
Right, but in Platonism, anytime you're talking about sort of a realism, ontological realism, when you're talking about something having an objectively true or falseness to it, you're saying that it cannot be otherwise. You will not see deviation from something that is objectively true or false if it is objectively, if it is ontologically or platonically true or false. I'm sorry if maybe...
But everything's on a scale of gradations. I don't see many dichotomies. So I'm not saying I don't see where you get the impression that I won't see what I had already said are all over the place. So, I mean, there are deviations everywhere. They occur. They just don't get they don't get the evolutionary pressure to be selected to become dominant, because there's no way to do that. They're going to be the deviation, and it is the ones that are supportive of the community that are the dominant ones. They're always going to be the dominant ones, unless we're talking about something like where you have a species that is only in isolated conditions and doesn't have any social standards at all.
Okay. I'll leave it there. There's many others who want to ask a question. Thank you.
Okay.
Question, Mr. Lepp.
Welcome to Texas.
Yeehaw.
I have it under really good authority. I did my own scientific study, and I believe that the evidence is clear that fig Newtons are really good. And in the Bible, the fig tree has been cursed. Am I wrong? So my question to you is, fig tree, good or bad?
You know, I would say this. It's a mystery on what the point of the fig tree was in the Bible. And I'm not addressing that. However, I would conclusively say fig trees are good. And specifically, I think fig Newtons are marvelous.
Did God not create the fig tree then?
God created the fig tree.
So
I
good or
don't think
bad?
that was the point of the damning of the fig tree. So, so I mean, the point is, and this is a theological discussion, what is the point of Jesus condemning the fig tree? It's different than, is the fig tree good? The answer is, so far as I can tell, fig trees are great. And you know what? If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. Fig Newtons are great.
Just ask.
So first of all, to call back to the thesis, I would like to thank the bartender for serving me this excellent beer, who is verifiable and tippable, and also the brewmaster, who is equally verifiable, who could probably go into deep discussion about why we like the beer so much. Now, my question for Aron, you went on a great discussion about morality and the value of honesty. I thought was particularly important. We missed, and I think it's a much longer discussion about the gray areas in morality. Particularly, sometimes I believe that it is important to be dishonest. For example, when my grandmother was on her deathbed, she asked me how she looked, and I gave her the answer she wanted. It was not true. So I thought I'd give you an opportunity to elaborate on that.
I look at dishonesty the same way I look at violence. It's something that is sometimes necessary and should be seen as a last resort. I can accept certain types of violence. I can accept certain types of dishonesty. We understand the purpose behind both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Last question from the floor.
Now we're
No,
both
honey.
going to get it.
I'll be shorter than that, I promise.
They got closing statements.
All right.
Like,
So I changed my questions like 5 times. First of all, the God is a moral monster thing isn't a shell game. It's a reductio ad absurdum, which I would have thought you would have recognized, where you assume a premise for the sake of showing that is absurdly in conflict with something else. But,
my argument that it was a shell game, but I like yours too.
okay, does the Bible contain instructions that are immoral and yet presented as if directed by God?
Yeah, I would think so.
So if the Bible contains instructions that would lead somebody to potentially violate God's standard for good, then wouldn't it be an unreliable text or method of determining what God wants?
No, I do not think that. And I will
So-
tell you why. I will happily tell you why if you'd like.
Okay, I just want to make sure that we're in agreement. The Bible contains instructions as if they were from God that would
Yes.
lead people to do something immoral,
Yes.
and yet that doesn't make it unreliable.
No, it doesn't. Would you like to know why?
Sure, yeah, I'd love to.
Okay. It is this. And times you can get instructions and misunderstand the reason for it, misunderstand the direction of it, misunderstand where it is going. And you know what? Being that we are mere mortals, and certainly myself included, we can get the interpretation of what is instructed entirely wrong.
I didn't
And
ask about the
likewise,
interpretation, I asked about the instruction.
and I'm happy to answer the instruction.
Okay.
Again, It could be that what is being demonstrated is what I pointed out earlier in the God is not a moral monster argument. It also could be pointed out, I would need to hear the context that you're alluding to. Because, I mean, it would work on a point-by-point basis.
Well, you agreed with me that it contains instructions that would lead to immoral acts. I don't know that I need to give an example if you're in agreement
Sure,
with me.
then all that I would point out is that the interpretation of the instruction, but you denied me the right to interpretation, but I would think that the interpretation of the instruction is quite integral. I don't know what the instances that you have in mind are.
Well, how do you tell that whether the interpretation is correct or not?
And indeed, that's a good question. What I would point out there is, and now this is where you get to hear a particular hermeneutic from me. For there are several hermeneutics going on in the Bible. Part of it is I'm a concordist. So I believe that the discoveries that we find in science must accord with the natural discoveries that are brought before us. And I'm not the first to come up with that. That comes from St. Thomas Aquinas. The other things that you would work on getting the correct answer to, and I don't know have the particular context to work with, is what exactly is the lesson here. If the lesson here, if the lesson that you interpret is in clear violation of any sense of reason, try to figure out what it would take for you to get to the truth of the matter. What would it take for you to come up with a lesson from this? There's all sorts of moments in the Bible that I have mysteries with. Any believer does. I don't understand the talking donkey thing at all. There's a whole bunch of things that are going on in Leviticus I don't understand. But I'm the first to admit it.
I don't know that that gets to how you can tell if you've interpreted it correctly.
The way you can interpret it correctly is if it bears fruit. If you interpret it wrong and it gets you the wrong result, then you interpret it incorrectly. Like you would, and that's a standard that works with anything.
Is the wrong result just whatever is inconsistent with God?
Is the wrong result is that which bears bad fruit. So if it bears bad fruit, you've got the wrong result.
Because it seems to me that we're saying that good is whatever God says it is, even if we're unable to identify it. And then the way you tell if it's good is if it bears fruit. That seems to me to be, bears fruit seems to me to be a phrase that is not defined, that doesn't edify anything, and certainly isn't tied to any philosophical argument. It seems to just be saying that if it's good, it's good.
Well, in that case, I sound like G.E. Moore, and I'm happy to be in the company of George Edward Moore. That at some point, you have to accept good as good, and at some point, you would recognize by demonstration whether or not it is good.
I think G.E. Moore, Sam Harris, and I would say that we agree that at some point you have to recognize good is good. We just don't go the unwarranted step further of claiming that good is God.
Well, I presented an argument that showed you that good does come from God. So no, G.E. Moore didn't do that. I did that. So G.E. Moore gets to thank me from heaven.
There is no such place.
He's dead.
Well, then he doesn't get to thank me.
Closing statements, 2 minutes, Mr. Ra.
How do I close that? The beautiful thing about the question that we were debating tonight was that it put the entire onus onto my opponent. The burden of proof was entirely his. It was his to establish that there is a God, that it does things, and that one of the things that it does is produce good, and that all of the good that was produced isn't attributable to any other source, but is only attributable to him, and he has failed every category to establish his case. And I really didn't have to have a counter argument. All I had to do was say, at this point, you have not made your case.
And all I get to respond back is, yes, I did. You didn't offer any counter response to my argument. Either you didn't understand it, or you failed to go through the steps to understand it. Not my fault, not mine to respond to.